Even in his wildest dreams, he can't have imagined that one day his grandson would stand on this spot and be following him to a far distant country.
It was fantastic, and I shall never forget it.
The cradle of our race had been rocked under these stars. Here had our childhood been spent. Edward Nelson Fell, 1916, from the book Russian and Nomad. Saryarka, Cradle of Civilization. Trails of Edward Nelson Fell. When we study the family archive, we have the opportunity to mentally make a journey into the world of the past, where everything was different. Time, space, people. Therefore, one can understand Jamie's excitement when he received an invitation to come to Kazakhstan and follow the path of his great-grandfather, Nelson Fell, who at the beginning of the last century, representing the interest of the British company, Spassky Copper Mine, lived and worked in Saryarka.
Gosh, being offered a trip to Kazakhstan, it's incredibly exciting. And I have very little idea what to expect when we get there.
You want me to say, so off to Kazakhstan?
I guess I'm hoping to see some of the places that my family, that my great-grandfather in particular, lived and worked, and the places they visited. I'd like to understand a little bit why they loved the place so much. So my partner Lucy's coming with me. She can't be here at the moment, unfortunately. She's working a shift as a carer, and I hope she will help me to keep my feet on the ground.
The journey of British guests to the largest region of the country, with which the history of Jamie's family is connected, begins with a flight from Nur-Sultan to Zhezkazgan. This city is considered the copper capital of Kazakhstan. Zhezkazgan means a place where copper is mined in Kazakh.
Thank you very much.
At the beginning of the last century, there was no city or village here. The industrial development of Zhezkazgan began in the second decade, when the international consortium Spassky Copper Mine was established near Karaganda. By that time, Jamie's ancestors had returned home, but they continued to monitor the progress of the new project, as a company created for the development of the Zhezkazgan region was affiliated with the Spassky Copper Mine, shares of which belonged to them.
We visited museums where the most extraordinary ore samples were on show. Yeah, it was impressive. It doesn't really convey how overwhelming an experience it was to see you're never really aware of, you know, the riches in the ground.
But one idea of natural resources is not enough to understand why Saryarka was vividly imprinted in the memory of Nelson Fell, a reserved and pragmatic man. There is a place in Saryarka which is a kind of repository of the historical memory of the ethnos. It accumulates everything that is associated with the authenticity of the Kazakhs. This place is called Ulytau, which means Great Mountain in Kazakh. The hearth of ancient metallurgy was burning in Ulytau. Horses were harnessed to war chariots. The great warriors set off. Therefore, Ulytau can be called by the sacred word for Kazakhs, Altyn Bisik, the golden cradle. Amazingly, Nelson Fell guessed the special meaning of this concept.
The cradle of our race had been rocked under these stars. Edward Nelson Fell, 1916, from the book Russian and Nomad.
He also felt the influence that the nature of the endless steppe has on the nomads, their way of life, and their worldview. From the memories of Nelson Fell. There were in this world a great many things of which we had never thought before, and of which our civilization had told us nothing. Truly, the majesty of nature, when man is in harmony with her, and not striving to master her, has a breadth and depth which seizes and dominates the soul. When Jamie looked at the sky of Ulytau, it seemed that he was mentally conducting a dialogue with his great-grandfather.
And also, of course, we're all aware of the ecology of the world and how everything depends on everything else, and that we are all only a tiny bit of borrowed time in a huge continuum. Can anybody come here and not feel that? You'd have to be blind not to think it was great, amazing, fantastic, beautiful.
Frank was a veterinarian according to his first specialty. He knew a lot about horses. He was an excellent rider and taught Nelson Fell's children how to handle horses. Therefore, in his memoirs, there are many episodes related to this topic. From the memoirs of Frank Vons Agnew. A rich Kyrgyz will own 2,000 or 3,000 horses besides his other stock, and he prizes them above all else. They are his investments and his bank balance. The cult of the horse in the life of nomads today can be seen as the ethnic festival, which is held annually in Ulytau. A good illustration for this holiday will be Frank's impressions of the national game he saw at the beginning of the last century. We are talking about the ancient game Audari Spak, with the help of which the steppe dwellers trained warriors and chose war horses. From the memoirs of Frank Vons Agnew. 2 men on horseback are tied together with a stout rope around the waist, allowing them about 10 feet of play. Each rides in his own way, trying to pull the other man from his saddle. They showed much skill in whirling around suddenly and changing their course to try to catch the other man at a different angle and off his balance. Food is also a part of the national culture, as well as the traditions of receiving guests. And Frank, being an observant person, could not ignore this topic. Mutton, beef, and horse meat, always boiled long and truly, gave them the rich soups. Small amount of brown rye flour made into a dough, cut up into pellets as big as a walnut and fried in mutton fat called bursaks. Our host arranged seats from bales of rags and a round table with legs about 8 inches high, on which the great brass samovar soon appeared for tea. Plates of sweetmeats and bursaks were offered.
To understand really why they loved it so much, you have to come here and see the steppes and meet the people and drink the kumis and eat the food and have the sort of experience that I've had packed into these few days.
But one thing is to get acquainted with the traditional way of life and feel the influence of the environment, and another is to understand what the sacred places associated with historical events mean for Kazakhs.
One of our first visits was to a place called Ulytau, where we met Tinkai, who was not like anybody I've met before, I think, because although she lives clearly in the modern world and uses it, as we all do, blogs and writing and so on. She has a streak that must be old Kazakh in her, and a sort of philosophical outlook, a quasi-religious outlook that I didn't really fathom, and I felt as though she saw a kind of deeper magic.
Tinkai showed Jamie a place full of legends and mysteries associated with the symbol of fire. Northwestern part of the Ulytau Mountains. Here is the Altyn Shoki Hill. Outwardly, it is unremarkable, but the historical campaign of Tamerlane against the Golden Horde Khan Tokhtamush is connected with the Altyn Shoki Hill. The stone, the original of which is in the Hermitage in St. Petersburg, reminds of it.
One of this language is not alive.
Another evidence of that event is traces from a ritual bonfire. By order of Tamerlane, it was lit to inspire the warriors before the campaign. The power of the fire was maintained with the help of the technology of the ancient metallurgist of Saryarka, who knew how to control fire.
Particularly one or two of the sites we visited, which were important in Kazakh history, it felt as though the history was bound up in a sort of religious feeling, which is not, I think, not the Western way, and something that I would love to have understood better and appreciated more, probably.
Having felt the invisible connection between this ritual bonfire and the copper smelting furnace of the Bronze Age, one can understand why Jamie's ancestor called the distant steppe one of the iconic places of the birth of civilization. Zhezdy is a small village between Ulytau and Zhezkazgan, mining and smelting museum. Here, Jamie had the opportunity to see what the ancient furnaces looked like and what people melted in them.
That's the ore which Nelson fell always looking for, I think.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Oh, there's a vein. There's a bit with a vein.
The owner of the museum, Zepin Kazanbayeva, showed Jamie exhibits related to the stay of the first British concessionaries in the region. We are talking about a project that was implemented here. It relied on three main sources: ore from the Zhezkazgan deposits, metallurgical production in Karsak, and coal from Baikonur. This is the equipment brought from Baikonur of that time. It is over 100 years old. To transport bulky goods, the British had to use a mobile narrow-gauge railway. It was built every 12 kilometers, then taken apart and laid down again. There was a road from Moscow to Zhusali. It is 380 kilometers from Zhusali to Karsak. A narrow-gauge railway was built here. The Mining and Smelting Museum has another British reference. This modest exhibit, donated by the British Council, is a copy of the map of the English diplomat and traveller Anthony Jenkins.
He wasn't exactly in the steppe, and he draws this map from Arabian travelers' books.
87 kilometers away from Zhezkazgan, not far from the highway leading to Ulytau, there is a settlement of ancient metallurgists, Taldysai. Every summer, Kazakh archaeologists work here.
We met the most extraordinary lady who went there every day, come rain or shine, and was very painstakingly excavating all these workings. The wind simply blew and blew and blew with no gusts, just the wind of the steppe, and it was a most inhospitable place to work. She was a tough lady, and gosh, I admired her. So what she was doing was incredibly valuable and a part of the absolute earliest history of smelting in Kazakhstan and some of the earliest smelting ever carried out in the world, and the earliest experiments into the precise methods of achieving good copper in the most efficient way. It was extraordinary and fascinating.
From Ulytau and Zhezkazgan, the guest went to the east of the Karaganda region, where Nelson Fell and Frank von Agnew lived and worked. The first stop is the old part of Karaganda, where at the beginning of the last century there were coal mines that belonged to the British.
I think in Frank and Nelson Fell's day, it was barely a settlement. It was just the site of coal mines and not very much else. Now it's a thriving city. Karaganda itself, with fantastic buildings and again open spaces, fountains.
The village of Spassky is located approximately 40 kilometers from Karaganda. The office of the Spassky Copper Mine Company and a copper smelter were located here. For Jamie, coming to Spassky is like traveling in a time machine. Are there any traces of the past life left here? The life he knew from the memories of Nelson and Frank, family photographs and watercolors of his grandmother. A copper smelter stood at this place.
Probably what most conveyed what Spassky must have been like was our visit to the present-day copper foundry at Zhezkazgan. The molten copper is poured into these kind of flat, and to think that Frank and Nelson had been doing the same thing on a smaller scale, I suppose, but doing the very same thing at Spassky.
Here is the building that has been preserved in Spassky since the time of Nelson Fell. Jamie peered in at the windows as if he wanted to find a reflection of a long past in them. Is this the building depicted in one of John Warhol's photographs? He is that very British who came here after the departure of the Fell family from the Kazakh steppe. In his book, this picture has a title, Store. This is a bridge under which a full-flowing river ran in the spring. Every spring, it threatened to erode the banks and flood the village. These monuments were captured in photographs from the family archive.
We drove over the very bridge that my great-grandfather had built there. It was extraordinary, and you could recognize it, although there was a lot less water in the river.
On the banks of this river, Marion Fell, the future grandmother of James, loved to draw. Then she was a young lady.
My grandmother, Marion, did a watercolor of it when it was opened, a little train puffing across the bridge with two camels coming underneath it.
Coal from Karaganda was delivered to the plant along this road. These massive concrete piles and embankments are traces from the past, and the rustle of gravel underfoot is an echo of that time. And here Jamie gave vent to the feelings. The next point on the road leading to the path of Nelson Fell is a miracle mine, with which three histories are incredibly connected. The Bronze Age in Saryarqa, the beginning of the industrialization in the region in the middle of the 19th century, and the arrival of the first foreign investors in 1903.
I think it's extraordinary how you can meet people and become very attached to them very quickly, even though your connection with them is for just, half an hour.
A direct descendant of Nelson Fell? We are glad that you are here. Hello. Steps that could bring Jamie closer to the history of his ancestors led to this building. Here at the beginning of the last century, there was a school where the future classic of Kazakh literature, Saken Seyfulin, studied. Today there is a small museum of local history. The local curator of the museum must have been in desperate need of archival materials, because in Soviet times it seems that the activities of the first Western investors were to some extent erased from the history of the village.
It was really exciting to see in the little museum at Uspensky a gun almost exactly the same as the one that Nelson Fell has a picture of in his book. The book which Adlet, the curator there, he was desperate to get his hands on, and
2 prongs.
I think he would have mugged me for it if he dared. I told him that you can get all that information online, and he was very pleased about that.
So when you use the weapon, the 2 prongs come down like that, so you rest that on there and aim for a long shot. Okay? That way you kill your wolf with 1 shot, 1 clean.
At that time, only hunting shots were heard in the vicinity of Uspensky. However, it should be admitted that in 1905, the first strike of miners in the region took place here at the mine.
So 1905, yeah? I think he's wrong to say you shouldn't go to the ruins of the past. I think you shouldn't dwell on the past and run your life because of the past. You cannot be held responsible for the deeds or the misdeeds of your ancestors, and you get no credit for how wonderful your ancestors were either.
The best confirmation of Jamie's words are the meetings at Uspensky. This grandmother had a relative who worked at Nelson Fell's mine at the beginning of the last century. She had only one grievance: why no one informed her about the arrival of the British guest. The conversation ended with wishing each other many years of life and with a photo as a keepsake. Finally, the most exciting moment for Jamie came. This site was the location of the Uspensky mine, because of which Nelson Fell and Frank Vans Agnew came here more than a century ago. Thanks to this mine, which was developed back in the Bronze Age, Fell made a sensational admission that the Cradle of Civilization was swinging under this steppe sky. From here, Nelson Fell watched the steppe dwellers who in late spring settled in their yurts and nomad camps and took notes on the peculiarities of the local landscapes. From the memories of Nelson Fell. The beauty of the steppes is a beauty which fills the heart and masters the mind. The appeal is not made to the eye and the senses. It is true that there is a beauty of detail, acres of anemones which burst into blossom in the spring, wild roses which cover the hillsides a little later, and especially the wonderful colors in which the whole atmosphere seems bathed. But the real beauty is the limitless expanse which, little by little, feeds the mind with a sense of universal harmony. Nelson Fell and Frank Vans Agnew devoted a special place in the memoirs to the Koyandy fair. Therefore, Jamie really wanted to visit the place where, in the opinion of his ancestors, one of the most striking events took place, when a variety of goods flocked to one place, including live cattle, camels, sheep, horses.
Anyway, on the way there, we went to the museum at Karkaralinsk, and where they had a yurt and beautiful Kazakh workmanship, the most fantastic furniture. So lovely to be in a rounded space, with a place with no corners, where your mind can sort of travel very freely. And I think that is something that maybe it is an expression of the freedom that a nomadic people have, and which we don't.
So beautiful.
Вот это сшито золотыми нитями.
This one is sewn with gold threads, also handmade.
Из костей животных сделано.
We saw only a certain amount of the way that Kazakhs lived in the traditional way. Compared with the way we live today, surrounded by any amount of stuff, most of which we don't need and lots of which we don't use, how they lived such a spare existence. And I know that was one of the things that appealed to Frank, to Nelson Fell and to Frank.
The clothes were kept locked in mysterious felt-wrapped chests along the walls, and when the big keys turned in the locks, they gave forth loud, pleasant, musical notes as the keys touched certain metallic springs. The beautiful clothes were all made by their owner, and the colors were in perfect harmony.
Koyandийская ярмарка.
Jamie's attention was drawn to this chest-style safe. It contained the money raised from trade at the Koyandy fair. A key with a secret. The secret of this safe cannot be immediately unraveled, although it lies in the most conspicuous place. This is probably how one should look for the key to the mysterious soul of the steppe dweller. Looks like Jamie's ancestors managed to find it. This instrument has only 2 strings and is poorly made, but the music the old man evolved from it was wonderful. For you heard the horses galloping plainly, and he imitated the quick beat of the hoofs, with quick raps on the board of the little guitar, while his fingers thrummed a perfect rhythm of movement. He sat cross-legged, never looking down, gazing at nothing, and played his thoughts unconsciously, as it seemed.
To Koyandy is quite moving as well. I don't know why, because I just, everything about it, the whole idea of the great big market and then all trekking all this way and obviously really enjoying the cut and thrust of the market and bargaining and things, and then taking a whole string of horses away. It's so different from my experience of going shopping. I mean, the fair no longer exists, but there were warehouses, buildings there that showed that had obviously been, you could see that it was the site of the fair.
Jamie touched the walls of the merchant warehouse as if trying to feel the spirit of the Koyandy fair. Some of the wise said, "Do not return to the ruins of the past," but do you always need to follow this advice?
If you don't know the past, how can you possibly decide what to do now and in the future? It's funny to go to a place where your ancestors lived. To understand really why they loved it so much, you have to come here. Fell and all the family really admired and appreciated the Kazakhs for their way of life, their simplicity, their faithfulness, their absolute reliability, and their faith in their God. It was something that they had not encountered before, I think.
Under the influence of the sun, wind, and water, the stone gradually changes. Its edges become round and the surface smooth. Likewise, a person who has lived for a long time in a large open space, in close contact with nature and people unlike him, also changes.
I suppose that COVID has made everybody appreciate more the amount of freedom we used to have and how much freedom has been taken away from us by the pandemic. And that the trip to Kazakhstan is even more the trip of a lifetime. I didn't realize at the time how much I thought the steppe was beautiful, but I think of it constantly. I can't.